In short, this was saying that the problems we experience that we do not want to experience. So with regard to the problems we do not want to experience, we try to eliminate those problems. We try to get rid of those problems. We try to overcome them, but we do not know the methods of how to really do them. So we're not able to eliminate the causes of suffering. This is the problem. The problem is that our suffering, trying to eliminate them, we cannot eliminate. We do not know how to eliminate the causes of suffering or the causes of suffering. So here, there is said to be two kind of reasons for why we have so many problems. One problem is that we do not think for others. We do not consider others' happiness. We have a sense of self-centeredness. We are self-centered. We cherish only the self. The second reason is that we don't understand reality as it is. We don't understand how phenomena really exist as they are in reality. So this is called the ignorance or the misperception of reality. And the method to overcoming those two, which are the causes for our problem, is wisdom, which overcomes the misperception of reality, and love or kind-heartedness, which overcomes the self-cherishing attitude. So by way of increasing, by way of working on those two aspects, well, that's how we can overcome those two obstructions. So this is in general the Buddhist way. So then another word for those two, the wisdom and the love or kind-heartedness, care for others, when we call them a different name, wisdom can be called the view of dependent rising, and then from the point of view of love, that can be called the conduct of non-violence.
Any pegi sherab di any sherab senata and tawa tenjung sen yugi chane cheba in tenje sen yujingi chane tenjung di anything several tang di chane and temento bi sherab la and tenjung kan leon di and yang tayo zengi tenjungs o di chene ta sherab dan zewa di chi zengi chiru yaru pidaru to sugi digi di chiru jugu indi di shile shabi to ne and sherab di ta se tosho di and 가수가 민자다 요즘이 된중 신비 아니 된중이 대화는 신비 싫어다 아니 제와기 제 토쇼 한 전주기 쌤 디니 송대도 좋니 디기 더도 산지고 뭐죠 저는 비슈시 디차되어 저는 다 바람이 변절 뒤라고 드세요 아니 점닝지 공부레스 마리버셀 보레스 라고도스 다라네 다 마리버셀에기 마리버 뭐 유에베 나로네 아니 대화는이나 몸에 마리버다 마리버 차쇼 마리버 타도 디셀에 거들라 타다다티 돈이 거시에디에디 어디래다.
덴제 그거 덴줄래도 유진 덴줄래도 유기.
그래. 다와들나다 무시 다와도 유다 유진이가 고라. 다 셰럽들나 유진기 다와체. 아니 덴질들나 유를 거더라.
So therefore, those two ways of looking at, so this is the term that Hong usually coins in terms of the view of dependent rising and then the concept of non-violence. Now, with respect to the wisdom, when we talk about wisdom, we all have the seed for such wisdom. We all have the potential or the seed for such wisdom to arise. And right now, this is expressed in the ability, for example, to have an education, to be educated. So because we have the seed of understanding, of wisdom. Likewise, we have the seed for great compassion because we have the ability to have compassion towards one or two people, towards a certain restricted number of people. And when this kind of wisdom is enhanced, or when this kind of, first of all, when this kind of love and care for others is enhanced, it can be enhanced to such a degree that it becomes great compassion, it becomes great love, it becomes the mind of bodhicitta or the mind of enlightenment. With regard to the wisdom, we have the view which is an object possessor, and then the view which is the object itself. So there the view of dependent arising, the view of dependent origination, and then the mind that understands, the wisdom that understands those from the point of view of dependent origination and from the point of view of dependence and interconnectedness. So understanding that phenomena are dependently arisen and therefore do not exist inherently. So the emptiness of phenomena, or the lack of inherent existence of phenomena, this is what is wisdom realized, what it understands. So on the deepest level, therefore, understanding that phenomena are mere names, they are merely imputed on the basis of name, that is dependent on name and consciousness. So this is the highest type of wisdom here, understanding the dependent arising, in particular from the point of view of phenomena, being merely imputed independent on verbal conventions, independent on names. And of course, from the higher method point of view, so there's this very compassionate or mind of very deep compassion, mind of bodhicitta. So therefore, when you say that you study at the library, so this is what this is all about. When you study at the library about generating love and compassion, eliminating ignorance. So this here refers to exactly that. So eliminating ignorance by way of understanding the suchness of phenomena on the subtlest level.
제자다 동해 탐지 자와타토는 유mon을 되는 중 유몬 되자시다 팀문 차도 뭐 여르디 디 탐지기 자와타토는 아는 마 세디 네 유기문이 유버진 디원 중 아니 마 유기문이 유버진 바디 다 통하면 반다나 거도 춘이 구조 맞아 보세요. 상자 대대라 슈춘이 많이 버진 디 가르치는 데서는 거의 갈기마체 원이기다 디 갈기 원이기 미두스비 셔럽디 춘이 맞게디 엔사데와 인디 다 원이 매번 신구와래 머리부터 인연보다 디 신야라 아니 가르 간데스 다 신고데시디 아니 원이기 유나 아니 간데지 두스 젠단 저 젠 아니 바기 원이기 주변이나 아니 풍부를 신도 예고를 해 근데 풍부다 풍부 소화차시 대다를 된신 가야 민도나 다디 원이메 다레스 되기 전에 되기 삼류기 제니 아니 원이메 신에기 다 다시 대차돼요.
So all our problems, all our difficulties, the problems and difficulties that we face right now, they can be traced back. They're caused by the different types of afflictions, and there are different types. There are coarser types, there are subtle types of afflictions. But anyhow, these afflictions in turn, their root is the misperception of reality, the sense that there is an I which exists from the side of the object, from the side of the I. There seems to be an I, and such a sense of this intrinsic inherent I, we have that since beginning of time. So since beginning of time, we have that misperception of reality, and it has stayed, it has remained the same since beginning of time, basically. So it has remained the same, and has not grown weaker. This is because we have lacking the wisdom understanding that the I does not exist by way of its own nature, does not exist inherently. So therefore we need to understand how the I actually, or in which sense the self exists in the sense that it doesn't exist from its own side, it does not exist by way of its own nature. So how can we come to such an understanding? Such an understanding, according to that understanding, by analyzing if there were such a self, if there were such an inherent self, we would be able to find it as either being one of the attributes, as being the collection of the attributes, or as existing separate from the attributes. So if you do not find something such a self, if we do not find it, that means that it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist the way it appears. In other words, we understand that it doesn't exist by way of its own nature.
增加了或是建立我们对于无自体性成立、非由自方成立的一个方法。那这也是因为昨天在课堂当中，这同学问我们到底为什么要一直找？那老师就说，这种寻找就是帮助我们认识到非由自体方面成立的方法。
在第二看法当中来，变成不把这些测验的不把民度是，他也不是学完了，也不见得修车不见得车上去带，那你民度是他学完的点不有了，挺少有了。地方因为就稍去打完的，切个是打完的，然后米这个民度拉完的，地基是上的民度是他接完呢，第三定呢他接考过有的，你马上你接了，然后现在这个定个同样的接送生的时候，定了，然后出贴上给我了，地基对他觉得那个年代前的竞争的团的他接过来，地基对他比较难做的，你那个普遍错过的这些的对立东西，看样他安逸了，那对了。这个民度来给他，你就是点样的，他就是的，点那些他这个他普遍看样容易，他第一呢，那对了专领机会高了，那对了捐可以，他专领机会捐点样就了，第二的，你伢子没事，工作上呢，你捐点过了，但那些大银是没属于呢，他对了捐就就是先把的看样把的，第二呢这个民度来把给捐的点，你没属于为呢。那些他马来人听着呢，小要都差着了。那些他因是这个民族是一个捐的，竞争的什么单，马英把他接，苏布他马英把他接，错把马英把他接，地里县马英把他接，才对。新的那新的民族来为呢，大可能他前面做事或者他点不的，你是我那的给我了， 신 쇼쇼 지간 태도 제선 남진 지당이 따주 제와 제단의 장면도 지당이는 의미를 지기래라 지금 말해라 한 그런 제저로 근데 실을 고매게요 말아 그뒤에 있는 다 제저로 다다디 전에 제지바 다가라 전에 집이 qabla 아니 인비촌의 김제마 인비촌의 김제선을 바로 가리도네 디키제 디 곰디 되지 다야 된다
So here in this case, so let's say, for example, with regard to this idea of self, so when we say in this room, for example, is there a vase or not? So how can we come to some kind of conclusion or some kind of certainty with regard to the absence of a vase in this room? Well, if we first look, if we just look in different places and we don't check thoroughly, we won't be able to come to some kind of stable decision, to some kind of conclusion that cannot be contradicted by something else. So therefore, if we just look half, like in the room, we check the room, but we don't check the entire room. If we just look in like half of the room, we check whether the vase is there or not. Well, in that case, we don't get to that kind of conviction, to that deep understanding that the vase is not there. In particular, if we don't have a deep sense the vase is really not in there, a strong conviction, then someone may come along and tell us, well, actually it's in the room, and doubt may arise. So therefore, to thoroughly and very seriously look for the object, that is the objective here. So likewise, in the same way, with regard to the self that appears to us, that kind of self, well, to look for it, where is such a self? If it existed, the only way it could exist would be as being one of the aggregates, as being the collection of the aggregates, or as being separate from the aggregate. There's this like looking for the self in a thorough manner, and then understanding if there's a sense it is one of those, such as it is one of the aggregates, etc., then we need to understand the fault, the contradiction of such assertion. So we engage in discussion, we engage in kind of dialogue, in discussion with others about this. What is the problem with such assertion that, for example, the aggregate, one of the aggregates is the self, that the mental consciousness or the awareness is the self. So we have a very strong habit of perceiving the self here, and by just engaging in half-hearted kind of analysis, whether it's others or ourselves, that will not be efficient enough, it will not be sufficient, it won't be effective enough. So whether we analyze it ourselves, we engage in this kind of discussion and debate with others, it is important to be very thorough about it, to not be half-hearted about it, but to really get a sense the self is not the aggregate, it is not the collection, and it does not exist separately. And that leads to an establishment by valid cognition, in other words, realizing, understanding, and incontrovertibly knowing that there is no self, so establishing a true valid cognition. And then, so this is very different to other phenomena, to other situations that we try to get an understanding of when we discuss, we debate it with one another, but that is sufficient usually. We leave it at that, and there's an comprehension of that. In this case here, whatever we discuss, so we need to take whatever we discuss, whatever we debate it, whatever we analyze it, we need to make that our object of meditation, make that part of our meditation.
다 가장 참. 다 제니 아니 우리 주변에는 제니 예보래. 아니 그런 얘기를 했어. 다 저디가 디지털 다 남시디 다 있으나이나. 땅에는 남시 다 있는데 가에기 터시시로 이렇게 보자. 가에 터시시. 다 디큐는 까마토나 내가 그림을 큐는 까마토나 양 삼도 신다기 토네. 라문에 매번 신이에 다 나가디네 라문에 매번 조마토로 다야 나가 신다기 토네 라문에 매번 신이에 다시 타반체 다 나가 강기 차네 큐는 조마토나 다 내가 지는 라문 저 가토요나 지나 라문에 타니도 라문에 아니 매번 마히네요 된담을 라문에 매신 다른 줄이 따와도 공부이네 양 버스치 편도 용대 다 딜레이 파지고 파기 까마토나 디체마토가 있나 야 센스메 따와도 봐 주에 뒤에 주마토나니 파기야 공부를 대신에 다 까봤어 자 예튜브 다 까고 딘디기 따와도 주에 어머 고메 딘디 용거로 다 갈라버려 미 리비 지나 지금 메스 아니 룽기 지나 지인이잖아 다 리비 까마투나 다 산지 유송샤 공부도 유송샤 아니 받은 다 왔다 되게 송샤 된다 메베토니 다 고메드니 용용고 다 바샤샤
So when we come now again to the place where we stopped yesterday. So what we were discussing before was the idea that when you search for something, it cannot be found. But if we come to the conclusion that something is found, that for example the mental consciousness is found, and that therefore the mental consciousness is the self, well now we need to engage in the methods to refuting that, to negating that the mental consciousness or the consciousness is the I. So and apply the different kind of reasons, apply the methods for such negation. And if we cannot do that, it is impossible for us for the time being to be able to do that. We cannot do that. Well then we need to look at something else, because there's no way that direction, that road right now is not a road that we can go, because we are unable to negate that the mental consciousness is the self. So we have to choose a different path, a different road. So here in this case we use not a different object. But maybe that is also impossible, that even taking a different object, reflecting on something else, nonetheless we are unable to refute or negate existence from its own side. So if that's the case, then we may actually go to the Svatantrika Madhyamika school. Their assertion being that phenomena do exist from their own side, but they do not truly exist from their own side. They only conventionally exist from their own side. They do not ultimately exist from their own side, but conventionally. So we can go, we can kind of direct our mind into the reasoning that is common to the Svatantrika school. And if that is too difficult and we are not able to engage in that, then we should engage in the reasoning that is presented, or in the view that is presented in the Chittamatra, the mind-only system. So that for the time being, as long as we don't understand the higher view, we try to understand the lack of external existence, that there are no external sense objects and so forth. Or if that is also proves too difficult, we engage our mind and we think about the lack of a self-sufficient associated self, or the lack of a permanent independent self. So in other words, we reflect upon the absence of a self that exists as separate from the other. And if that also doesn't work, well, we may decide that instead of being followers of reasoning, we are now followers of scripture. So instead of engaging in actual thorough investigation, we just follow, so the investigation that was set forth by the Buddha, by Nagarjuna, by Chandrakirti, and so forth, we just follow from what they have said and take it on faith, take whatever they've said on faith, without engaging in reasoning.
가장 디레다 남시디 다 이세 그래서는 타절 줄려냐면도 아니 로디기 줄려냐면서디 타버들라 줄려냐면 타절이 차디 다 남시디 샤네 남시디라 마운용기도 술을 핑게디 제자다 남시디 말해스 디레 제자 원내제는 디 가게 딜레파이 가에기 토를 다 가리시에도 디 가게 수수랑기 시에나 야가요 다 이는 미망으로 딜레디 개버미도 녀시네 녀네 미신다기 신네야 신다 사모 녀데로 딜레디 타가라라 시주르샤 시에지 에테테 신네 딜레 마창교된 디유네야 그 삼제 신네 디로.
So as we discussed yesterday, with regard to the rope and the snake, or the mental consciousness, or basically the mental consciousness being the self. So in that case, or similar to that would be that the rope is the snake. So we had that discussion previously of the rope being perceived as a snake. And likewise, is the mental consciousness perceived, or is that the basis for thinking I? So do we think I based on the mental consciousness, or on the basis of consciousness? So here we're trying to refute this, we're trying to engage in refutation of such. And so actually it would be easier to just do it on a one-on-one basis, but of course there are many people here, so I'm the one who's kind of giving explanation, making the comments. But whatever I say, you should yourself, if there's anything you disagree with, you should voice your opinion on that, and you should comment on this and share your own views.
那地区的主领经理，具体到地位有那主领行情，到地位面的大家解决吧。到地位都那主领行情，是吧？给俺你主领去下地。
看在翻译上方便这样。
So it is like let's just kind of discuss the way we discussed it on Twitter yesterday. That makes sense. That otherwise we just continue talking in a way and explaining the explanation as I've given it before.
方便的话，那就继续维持对方的状态。如果翻译不方便的话，他就想要用什么别的办法。
这上他当路嘛地，他怕这个当然嘛这呢，这个健康那么当就这，这个他这个差别那么些的那些，这两个我们都是对了的，第几的，第多少，你给你那么些的两个我们嘛听你们都，那超他这个差别不超过的些，那你我对两个我们都，其实对两个健康的角度的，大家看了明白。 So actually now Vishnu will present his own view and then Yankuto is supposed to have okay what Vishnu says and he's supposed to debate back. So between the two of them, and as I said earlier, if you want to comment on this too. So the view that was yesterday actually put forth by Yankuto was that when we say I, this is like the I, on the basis of the consciousness, we think I, just as with the rope. So the example here is the rope is perceived as an actual snake. So the rope here is analogous for, the rope is the example for the mental consciousness, whereas Geshe-la's view is that the rope is analogous for the 5 aggregates, and that on the basis of that, the thought I arises. So this is their kind of different views, so presenting the different views, and now they engage in discussion or debate on that. So what is the problem? So Geshe-la is asking Yankuto, what is the problem if you say that the collection of the aggregates, the 5 aggregates, are the basis?
라고도 주고 뒤주고 인데 라고 나이도 안 내기도 생각이 라고 대화랑 많이 붙이 뒤 소고디 많이 쓰고 가려나 수고 강도 내기도 쓰게 되요 가원 내기도 수고 강도 내기도 쓰라고 뒤 내기도 뒤 라고 많이 쓰고 차디디 간 수기 공부 차당 소고디 많이 붙이 쓰고 그러지
소고디 내기도 쓰게 되시에
가 내기도 쓰레디 tam samu 코드 만 내기도 쓰지 되게지 뒤지 수기 공부 초보스로 신가 차디 위협이나 아니 미리 가원 내기도 쓰지 수기 공부가 초과가 깨지 쉬어야지 나서 전화버지 부수도 해야지 드시면
So the interpreter's point is not saying that it is the collection of the aggregates. Well, the problem would be that in the collection of the aggregates is the body. So then one would also perceive each of the aggregates as the self. So it would also be the body would be the self. Now, if the entire body were to be the self, then when my arm hurts and I say I feel sick, there's a sense I'm sick, but the sense of sickness is only the part of the arm that feels sick. It is not that the entire body feels sick. So it is not the sense that the entire body is unwell. Whereas if the 5 aggregates have to be that on the basis of which one says the self, then when the person is sick, which in actuality is a certain part of the body, there would have to be a sense that the entire body is sick.
그래서 다 라바트가 나와이나 라바나기 두스 레기 레디 계단님도 만나기도 레기로 왔다. 이제 초보대 나기 두스 이제 선심이 두스 뒤로 왔다 김제.
So Geshe was saying, so just to repeat your point, if the collection of the aggregate. So that's the basis for the I. But when I say I am sick, actually it's just a part of the aggregate that is sick. It's not the collection of the aggregates that is sick. So that's your point, isn't it? And then people said, yeah, I agree.
다 경쟁 뒤이나 경쟁이 파티 되기 파 지고 놓지 아니 뒤이나 말다기 둘라기도 수불다디 말다기 둘라기도 남시에 다기도 스테지 상미면도 제가 남시에 다 많이 그래도 도와서 리버치 그래도 도와서
So now he's responding, saying, I use the same reasoning now when I debate with you. You asserting that the consciousness is the I. For example, when I say someone looks at me, someone is watching me, someone is observing me, someone is looking at me, I'm not thinking that someone is looking at my consciousness, which again would mean therefore it couldn't be the consciousness, which is that basis.
네 바주의 소비 풍고 통해서 고통 공부해서 우리 찾을 수 없지 말고 오늘 바람 때문에 있어. 얘는 공할 때기도 내는 것도 반다 치료스 뭔가 느끼게 해야지. 문제 걸 지대는 다 하고 있어. 그럼 현재 그런 것도 너무 주는 걸로 지den기니 다녀도 가도기는 살지 있다는데 이 그런 원이 말해지 다가는 거 지금 납디에서 디저를 오치시 고통도 포스트 다 되고 싶다. 오늘 그런 고통 내고.
네. 다 지대는 잡으면도 나 통하는 말이지. 다 도도신 뒤로다. 통을 잡 지대는 잡아서면도 나 통하는 말이지. 말다요 말이지.
So Rinpoche's response to Geshe-la's debate was, well, actually that is just the way it appears. It's just a mode of appearance to us. It's something that is known in the world, but it's actually not true. So, for example, in Rinpoche he said Vasubandhu's Abhidhamma Kosha, where it's basically saying that it is known that the earth is the color. The earth is a color, so that the brown earth is a color, whereas in actuality the earth is not a color. So this is just renowned to the world. And it's not actually what happens. And so Geshe-la double checks. So you're saying that it is just renowned in the world that someone is looking at me, that we should say so, actually just say so, but in actuality it doesn't feel like someone is looking at me. It's just a way of saying it. It's just a way of expressing this, that someone is looking at us. When it's actually the body, it's actually looking at the body, but this is not really that sense of me, so it's just how it seems.
다 디제디 딘디나 다 말라 라발라 디주디 말라 디주스 내려 다 디에 지대나 잡았자마도 말라 디주예요 말아.
So if you say that, well then, if someone were to stab me with a knife, so then I would say, oh, they actually didn't knife me, they didn't stab me. This is just according to how it is renowned in the world. In actuality, no one has stabbed me. Has stabbed me with a knife. Are you saying that?
잡아마도 말라 디주요 말아.
당간 내기도 내도 못 내지. 这地区的人，念的地主的。
So with regard to stabbing someone with a knife, that is just renowned to the world. It's not really that there's a sense that there's actually a self that is being stabbed.
这地经济上就是，这地人也上去，这地到处，地那这地主的今天的差不多这么多，我们做没印象，那个都来的今天差不多这么多，他给拉不的拉不了对比的，西瓦森那边都，楚瓦森那边都地。 So then, if you say it's just with regard to the stabbing, so it's not really that the person is stabbed. Well, what about getting sick? You also don't say that you get sick. It's rather that the consciousness that pervades the body, consciousness that pervades the body where there is the sickness, where there is the pain, that only that experiences that pain, and not actually body experiences. Is that what you're saying?
也只是世间共许而已。事实上呢，我没有痛。那如果我这样讲话，你的看法是什么呢？
근데 라본 나기도 세지 빠지 지tina 잡아시야. 다 라본 나기도 세지 지tina 잡아 지금 마셔서 집서가 세심이 있나? 다 근데 라본 갑지 수가 있나? 디 콜리슈 콜리 초와디기 이 이동 용어지 많은 거 봐도 완전 라본 나세 계제 되는 다이 루슈 콜리 초와디 루슈 코랑기 초와디 용거 있나요? 이게 샤바디기 뒤에 나기를 마치 봐요. 뒤만 용거 있나? 다동양 용라도 그래서 다 라과 디수 있는 건 내기도 세지 유식이 초와디 이동 용어식게 뒤 유식 콜리 용 이게 다 이모스터 뒤집어나기 제 딱다르죠. 라고 내기 제 다.
이디 간데스타게 제세야 돼요.
이 왕시국이 소화지 이시국이 소화지 왕시국이 소화지 명령도 신이 나기 도세 다 줘.
네, 나기도 나래
지금 가서 신이 나기 도세. 그래서 딩딩이 라고 나디 세도 가서 지금 다 봐야죠. 그래서 라고 유지 많이 그 나이스키가 막. 나이스 샤바 이기 샤바
나이스.
So I interpret it saying that actually the hand is not an object possessor. So therefore saying my hand is sick, my hand hurts, my hand is not well, this is just a way of speaking. This is just how it is renowned in the world. In actuality, what happens is the moment you poke your skin, the moment you poke your skin with a needle or with a knife, first what happens is a body consciousness experiences a feeling. So a body consciousness arises, which experiences an unpleasant feeling. And that unpleasant feeling is then registers with a mental consciousness. With a mental consciousness, which is the kind of possessor, like a sense of possessing the body, etc. So that kind of possessing mental consciousness, that possessor that feels as like a possessor of the body, etc. There's then the thought, I am sick. So really that sense of sickness is the consciousness that really is sick. So if you interpret saying it really comes down to the consciousness. Geshe-la doesn't check. Do you mean the consciousness that it really feels sick? That's what it's getting sick, and Geshe-la says yes. So because that is an object possessor. It is a consciousness, something that possesses an object, and therefore there's a sense of being sick. The body itself, the physical body, is not an object possessor.
진짜 동행 용gen디 동행디 다 류디다 동행 용라고 말다 동행 용의 kiến체 버와다 다 류다 파기 지다 치료기 지다 나기 류용본이데 체베 왕기 류기셰버 동행디게 류기셰버 동행디게 되버디다 아니 이지셰버기 마 아니 동행 용구도스 만나기도스 나버레스 디르베
유시 동행 대화랑 20거기 소바디 만용나 유시의 소화 등이 때문에 유시의 소화 기술 등이 깨지고 땅버리네. 이식이 된 많이나 근데 류를 소화 이거 가지고 납득이
제선다 류시코지 소화 등에 이식이 용시도 간데스 용. 나서 땅에 류시디 당겨래. 이시디 당겨.
이시디 노합 나에 당겨 요새 그 이시디만 이마때나
제가 이시디기 안에 동에디 두 미두스래 기제들의 마도 데리 로스뇽에 기제입니다. 이시디 샘기 마지부터 남진 어저 이시버의 샘센 민다로 지금 용다이 샘기 메주 세는 수부기 마지 가야로 제가 스트레스 수부에 나자다데 세버지고 용해요로 이시버 디지디다 류이시버디 동에뇽 다 이시버디 디의 주도 제제 어 동에디 용구도 동에 친구도 동에 충종도 디기제시버 마도 디 마힘비 아니 이시버디 동에 용수시돼 유 베트로 유랑 치고 그래서 같이 치고
당기죠.
세우 차리고
당기죠.
아 어이
Anyway, so now Geshe-la asked Putula, so with regard to this experience then, well, usually we have a kind of experience of something. So the body actually doesn't experience anything. We're not saying that the body experiences something. We say the body is just the condition that leads to an experience. So what do you need? You need a knife in the case of the stabbing of the body with a knife. You need a knife. You need the empowering condition, which is the body, and in dependence on that, you then have a body consciousness, which experiences the pain. But then Geshe-la asked him, what do you mean the mental consciousness experiences suffering? You're talking about the body consciousness. And then Tutu's response was, well, if there wasn't a body consciousness, you couldn't have the experience of the mental consciousness. So therefore you need the body consciousness. And then Geshe-la said, well, yes, that makes sense, but how does the mental consciousness experience a problem? So Geshe-la continued saying that isn't it that the mental consciousness knows what the body consciousness has perceived. So it's the knowledge of that. In actuality, we need to differentiate between a suffering experience that is mental and that is physical. In the sense, the mental consciousness experiencing suffering and the physical consciousness. So one of the sense consciousness experiencing suffering. So one of the sense consciousnesses, the suffering that is experienced is different from the mental consciousness experienced suffering. In the sense that we can be sick, but our mental consciousness can be happy. So therefore, the point is therefore, the mental consciousness has to kind of interpret this as suffering, doesn't it? It's not like it experiences that suffering. The mental consciousness does not experience the suffering that the body consciousness experiences. It is really the body consciousness that experiences the suffering. So it's not the mental consciousness that as such experiences that.
다 케미도 이 용주디 단다 세부 차기면도 케미 다 용어 차샤 이기 시바디 지리다 동행 용은 뭐만디 다 이기 시바디 차버다 되게 용바이나 레데 이 뭐만디 이기 시바제 다 되기도 이는 이기 시베 용세디 되기도데 이는 개 용세디 지든 잡아서 나왔어 양조 개 용세디 이기 시베 용세디 다 원해제 개 용세디 지든 잡아서 빼나 아니 수부통에디 원해제 이네 말다기 수불타에디 원해제 말다기도 세디 지든 잡아서 그래다가 디나신 아니 이기 시베 용바디 원해제 이네 말 용래디 지든 잡아서 좋았어 지거리 좋았어.
So getting this next point now and saying, okay, never mind, it's not really clear to me how the mental consciousness experiences the pain that the body consciousness experiences. But never mind, let's just leave this. Let's assume that there is a way in which the mental consciousness experiences the pain in the same way as the physical consciousness did. So let's just assume that is true. However, the next question that arises is that if the mental consciousness experiences pain, taking that as a reason for saying I experience pain, that should just be renounced to the world and not really be the case. Why? Because you argued early on when the body is sick and I say I am sick, that is not really what happens. That's just renowned to the world. This is just renowned to the world. In actuality, there is no self that is sick. Well, if the body gets sick and it's merely renowned to the world, in the world that the I is also sick, that should be the same for the mental consciousness. When the mental consciousness is sick, it experiences problems. Then to say I am sick should merely be renowned to the world. Same argument or same reason.
다 직송당의 계제만 힘받체 양조 뒤와다 다 이기 남시디 나이나 다 이기 남시 코드 중에 다 서로와요 서로와다 다 다다 사고도 나기도 라이트서 다 원에디 서로와들와다 서로와딩 거 많이 바카르 아니 남다 단디 파게테스 다 먼저 남사 하고 해도 가버려대 남시의 년도 유대비 룸여와 어디 인 다 많이 바카르 시에도
So now let's leave it at that kind of like applying reasonings that are similar. So one reason that was presented by one person to reply to the similar reasoning. That should be sufficient with regard to this right now. But from the point of view of mental consciousness or the mental mind being the self, when we talk about the main mind, with regard to a main mind and mental factors, when we talk about a main mind and mental factors, well, we have a main mind, that is the sense of an I, there's a sense of an I, and then there's feeling, which there's a sense of an I with regard to feeling. So why is the main mental consciousness, why is that the I, and why is not the feeling? Why do we not perceive of the feeling as I, as Goto Buddha has said that it's the main mental consciousness that is the I? What about the feeling? And what about at the same time, whenever there's a mental consciousness, there's a subtle energy ring. Why is there no sense that the subtle energy ring is the self? What is the reason for that?
아니 된지기 남시에다 많이부터 유중외네 식제 다데리스 그러 그냥 때스 조동도 가도
So, okay, so this is one way of looking at it. But even, let's say, we cannot really, the kind of reasoning here, whether the such a wind, etc., is not the self, well, we've done the reasoning before with regard to the aggregates and so forth. So we can apply these kind of reasonings. But anyway, if we cannot establish this, if we cannot establish this with regard to the mental consciousness, for example, well then a different reason. So if we say, we apply a different reason here, if we say the mental consciousness is the I, well, are the mental consciousness and the I, are they one, or are they different? That is another line of reasoning we can introduce here.
다 딘디지니 디게 다 딘디체니 디 제모토가 있는 연주 아니 남시 다 있는 다 남시 있는 다 랑기 차시의 때니 되봐 그거 아니 규단 kiến的 되봐 딘디 인디잖아요 아니 딘디기 규단 kiến的 되봐 인지는 규진 유에는 요래 규진 매나 요마래 진짜 규진 매나 매바 차도 뒤 거리다 때문에서는 그런 게 문에 유출면이 다 때문에 뭐시디 가산의 차림이지 라블라야 가시yan 디 낸덴체나 모두 디 바라들지 위에 계절다 그 고랑기 문에 유에나 아니 고랑기 문에 유출지 거래 고랑기 문에 유출지 유에나 아니 규진으로서도 최신다 매네 단대 유 라투베지 거래 안티 유에가 이나 아니 규진을 때세야 돼 지기로 말해 전 치르레레레라 바티요래 네 가시대요 가라 열다 말란다 너무 딱이다
So, anyway, in analyzing in such a way, different or one, well, we may not be able to come to some kind of conclusion, but then we can look at it from another perspective, from another kind of aspect. We can take to mind another aspect, in the sense that when something exists, it exists independent on parts, or it exists independent on causes and conditions. Now, if the causes and conditions that give rise to the particular object are there, we say the object is there. So that shows the object does not exist in reality. It doesn't actually exist really. Now, I've actually said, like Geshe said, I've said this already twice, but for some people one needs to say it again and again, spell it out again and again, because otherwise it just doesn't become clear. So I'll say it again. If the phenomenon, if any phenomenon were to exist from the side of the phenomenon itself, then it could exist without causes and conditions. In fact, it would have to exist without causes and conditions, because it would be self-sufficient. It would not depend on causes and conditions. So therefore, even if the causes and conditions were not there, it would be able to exist. If it were to be able to exist without causes and conditions, it would not depend on causes and conditions. So therefore, Geshe was saying this needs to be spelled out again and again, because there's still some people who say, yes, it exists and it depends on causes and conditions. It exists from its own side, but it depends on causes and conditions. Some people may still insist on this, but because something exists on something other, such as causes and conditions, for that reason, the phenomenon does not exist from its own side.
老师说他这几个阶段，其实每一句话里面都有他的那个意思，这样子。
아니 지단기 따라 남시 다 이문이 기점에 보세 on줄도 차단 건지 요래 세디 나로라 마오니 비도 세디 가르레스나 아니 마투비 마티기 마나타기도 마나기도 세로 다가라 마오니 비로레스 지산티 디에 신고에지도 가르사 예망이 마오라디 디 부바레 생수를 지상로 걸어 디로 차하고지 마오니 비로세디 지지 제마신이지 지상 마오니 비로디 마투 마티기스 남체규의 기대 다가라나 마오니 비로레스 디 아니 기주지 대위시시 중앙 송샤 마오니 비로니 마투 마테 냐만 남소스 세상 마오니 빌로디 아니 마투비 마테기스 얘기 아니 로다가라레스 진짜 송
So in general, so when we say I